The flame pillars had stood in the grand hall of House Orin for 400 years. They were taller than 3 grown dragons stacked end to end, carved from black stone, and enchanted to bow only to the voice of true royalty. Every hatchling of House Orin had made them bow since the hall was first built. Every single one. Until today. Saravan stood at the center of the hall and looked at the nearest flame pillar. It flickered quietly, orange and gold, completely unbothered by her presence. The stone floor beneath her claws was cold. The hall was packed on all sides: senior nobles, house advisors, palace guards in ceremonial armor, and 24 junior attendants who had been arranged in neat rows near the base of the pillars. The first royal trial was simple, as trials went. Open the throat, let the sound rise, push it outward with intent. Every hatchling before her had done it without thinking. The judges described it as instinct, something that came from inside without needing to be found. Saravan opened her mouth. She noticed one of the junior attendants near the left pillar shift his weight from foot to foot. He was nervous. The hatchling before her, her older brother Davin, had produced a roar so powerful that 3 attendants had stumbled backward. This one looked like he was already bracing. The sound inside Saravan was there. She could feel it, low and warm, somewhere behind her ribs. But she was watching the attendant. She was thinking about whether the sound, if it came out wrong, if it came out too sharp or too sudden, would knock him sideways into the stone base of the pillar. She thought about it for 1 second too long. What came out was a short, thin sound. Not a squeak, quite, but close. The kind of sound a very small animal might make when startled. The flame pillar did not move. The enchantment did not register anything worth responding to. The hall went quiet. Not the polite quiet of people waiting for something to happen. The other kind. The kind that lands on your scales and stays there. Head Judge Orin, an old dragon whose neck plates had gone pale with age, made a mark in the official record without looking up. His face said nothing. That was almost worse. Saravan closed her mouth. She stood still. She did not look at her father. Sovereign Vareth sat on the raised platform at the far end of the hall in the seat of witness. He was there not as a judge, but as tradition demanded. Every reigning sovereign watched the trials of their children. He was enormous, gold-brown and ancient, with scars across his left shoulder that he had carried since before Saravan was born. He sat very straight. His expression was what it always was, controlled, distant, and carefully empty of whatever he actually felt. She did not look at him. She looked instead at the junior attendant near the left pillar. He had relaxed now. His shoulders had come down. She noticed that. The hall began to move again, slowly, as if waking up. Robes shifted. Claws clicked on stone. Someone coughed. The business of pretending nothing unusual had happened began in earnest. Counselor Nira, tall and slate-colored, stepped forward from the judge's row and made a precise mark in the ledger of trials. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The mark said it for her. First trial, first attempt. Incomplete. The page moved on. Saravan was guided toward the side hall by a palace attendant. She walked without being told to hurry, without being told anything at all. That was how it worked. When a trial failed, you were moved away from it as efficiently and quietly as possible, the way you removed something from the table when the meal was finished. The side hall had a long window that faced the diplomatic gallery. Saravan did not usually look at the gallery. It was where the minor species had their seats, the ones who had joined the sovereignty in recent generations and were permitted to observe court functions but not participate in them. Politely invisible. That was the phrase the advisors used. There was a human sitting in the gallery. Saravan had seen humans before, a few times, at formal events. They were short and soft-looking, and they moved quickly in a way that seemed unnecessary. This one was sitting with a translation device on his knee and a flat writing tablet beside him. He was mid-aged by what she could tell, with a plain face and eyes that were doing something unusual. They were not looking at her with pity. They were not looking at her with the careful blankness of someone pretending not to have seen what they had just seen. He was looking at her with simple, plain curiosity, the kind of look that wanted to understand something, not judge it. Saravan did not know what to do with that look. She filed it away somewhere and kept walking. That night, alone in her chamber with the lights low, she practiced. She made sounds into the dark, one after another, feeling for the thing behind her ribs that had been there and then wasn't. The sounds came out wrong each time. She would attempt the second trial in 3 days. She lay down on the cold stone and stared at the ceiling and thought about an attendant with nervous feet, and a flame pillar that had not moved, and a pair of human eyes that had looked at her like she was something worth figuring out. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from effort, but from failing in public, repeatedly, while everyone watches with careful faces. Saravan learned the shape of it over 14 days. The second trial was the flame claiming. A stone tablet stood on an iron stand in the center of the trial room. The task was simple: breathe fire onto the sacred stone and hold it there until the surface turned gold. Every Dracari royal hatchling produced their first real fire within the first month after hatching. It was basic. It was biology. Saravan's fire, when it came at all, came as smoke. Warm smoke, slightly colored, smelling faintly of something that older dragons said reminded them of deep cave minerals. But smoke was not fire. Smoke did not light stone tablets. She stood before the tablet and did what she had done for the past 3 days in preparation. She breathed in. She focused. She pushed. Warm smoke drifted out and curled around the tablet without doing anything useful. She noticed the words carved into the back of the tablet before the trial began. Third Sovereign, Orin the Unbroken, the one who ended the Interregnum Wars. She had read about him twice in the palace library. She kept thinking about whether lighting the tablet on fire was the appropriate way to honor a name like that. The thought sat in her head and would not move. Judge Orin marked the ledger again. Nira did not look up. 3 days later, the third trial. The wing ascent. The palace tower was open at the top, a vertical column of air that royals were meant to fly straight up without stopping. The thermal currents were ideal in the center. Everyone said so. Saravan had spent 2 days calculating the shadow angles on the tower's south face and what they did to the thermal currents in the upper third. The maths came to her easily. The conclusion was clear. In the upper section, the thermal gap was real, and compensating for it through the center route would put severe strain on the inner shoulder joints of a smaller dragon. Her wings were smaller than average. She knew this. She flew. She made it past the halfway point before the pain in her shoulders became something she could not push through without risking actual damage. She landed. She had not been wrong about the gap. She had simply not known how to avoid it. Judge Orin made the mark. 3 trials. 3 incomplete results. The fourth trial was the hunt right. The palace had a large wilderness reserve at its rear edge, 2 square kilometers of curated forest and open ground, where ceremonial beasts were kept for exactly this purpose. She found the beast in under 40 minutes, using a path along the eastern ridge that none of the judges had seen a hatchling use before. One of them wrote a small note about this in the margin of his record. She found the beast. She stood 10 meters from it. She looked at it. It was feeding 2 young ones. Small, unsteady creatures pressed against their mother's flank. Saravan stood there for 11 minutes. She did not strike. When time was called, she walked back to the judges and said she had lost the trail. She had not lost the trail. Judge Orin made the mark. The 5th trial was the memory recitation. 1,012 names, spoken from memory, in order, in under 3 minutes. The lineage of sovereigns, unbroken from the founding of House Orin to the present day. Saravan had memorized them all. She had tested herself in her chamber 6 times and completed the list perfectly each time. She stood before the panel of judges. She began. The names came quickly and cleanly, one after another, a river of sound. 601, 602, 607. She glanced left, as she sometimes did when concentrating, and she caught Counselor Nira's expression. Nira's face had shifted slightly. Something small and unreadable had crossed it at name 600. Saravan could not tell if it meant she had said that name already or was about to say it again. She tried to remember. The memory of which way she had been moving through the list suddenly had 2 possible directions, and she could not determine which was real. The river stopped. She stood with her mouth open and nothing coming out. Judge Orin made the final mark. 5 trials. 5 incomplete results. He set the ledger on the table and looked at her over the top of it with an expression that contained nothing useful. The official designation came the following morning, and proven. She had 6 weeks remaining before her naming ceremony. If she could not complete at least 3 of the 5 trials in that time, she would not be granted royal standing. In the human diplomatic gallery, The liaison officer named Aldrich had attended every trial. He was not required to. His brief was cultural observation during formal court events, and trials qualified as formal, so he came. He filled 8 pages of notes. Most of what he wrote was not about what Saravan had failed to do. It was about what she had done instead, the path she had taken through the reserve, the shadow calculation she had clearly performed before the ascent, the way she had looked at the tablet's carved face before the flame trial, the way she had watched the left pillar attendant before the roar. He read the notes back 3 times. Then he sent a formal diplomatic request to the court of House Orin. He was requesting a brief, informal meeting with Princess Saravan. Cultural documentation purposes. Routine. He did not know if they would approve it. He sent it anyway. The courtyard off the East Garden was used mostly for storing ceremonial equipment between festivals. Nobody important came here. That was why Saravan had chosen it. She arrived first, which she had not expected to feel anything about, but she did. She stood among the covered pots and folded banner poles and told herself she had agreed to this meeting only because she had nothing useful to do with her afternoons anymore. That was not quite true, but it was a comfortable version of the truth. The human came through the low archway at the agreed time. Not a moment early, not a moment late. He was shorter than her. Most things were shorter than her, though she was small for a hatchling. And he wore the plain gray-green of the human diplomatic staff. No recording device. She had expected one. Its absence did something small and complicated to her assumptions. He greeted her in formal Dracarys. The pronunciation was not perfect, but it was careful, which was more respectful than perfect would have been. Then he switched to the trade language, and his shoulders relaxed a fraction. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said. "I'm Aldrich. I'm with the Human Cultural Liaison Office." "I know who you are," Saravan said. "You attend every court event. You sit in the gallery and you write things." "That's accurate," he said. He did not apologize for it or explain it away. He simply found a low stone ledge and sat on it, which put him closer to her eye level. "I wanted to ask you about the trials, if that's all right." She said nothing, which he seemed to understand as permission. "I watched all 5, he said. "I'd like to understand what happened. Not the official account. What actually happened, from where you were standing." "I failed," Saravan said. "That is what happened." "That's the result," Aldrich said. "I'm asking about the experience." Saravan looked at him for a moment. She had prepared for pity. She had prepared for the careful diplomatic tone people used when they were trying not to say something unkind. She had not prepared for this, for someone treating the question like it had a real answer worth finding. She gave him the rehearsed version first. The official language. The tone she used with Counselor Nira. He listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he asked his question. "What were you thinking about, right before each test started?" The courtyard was quiet. Somewhere in the garden beyond the arch, something was moving through the low plants. No one had ever asked her that. Not her father. Not the judges. Not Nira, who had sat across from her through 3 formal debrief sessions and asked many questions, none of which had been that one. It was such a simple question. It was the most obvious question. She had sat through 17 different conversations about her failures, and not one of them had included it. She answered him. She told him about the attendant with the nervous feet, and how she had been watching him instead of listening to the sound behind her own ribs. She told him about the 3rd sovereign's name on the back of the tablet, and the thought that would not leave her head about whether fire was the right thing to put on it. She told him about the shadow calculation she had done before the ascent, and how she had known about the thermal gap, but not known what to do with that knowledge in time. She told him about the beast, and its young pressed against its flank. She told him about Nira's face, and the way the number 600 had become a door with 2 exits, and she had not been able to choose. She told him all of it. She had not planned to. It came out anyway. Aldrich listened without writing anything. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You didn't fail those tests because you couldn't do them," he said. "You failed them because you were doing something else at the same time, and your mind refused to stop." "I don't know what that means," she said. "It means your brain doesn't filter," he said. "Everything that comes in at full volume. The attendant's feet, the name on the stone, the thermal gap, the young ones, Nira's expression, all of it lands, and all of it matters to you. And your mind tries to deal with it all before it lets you move forward. That's not a failure of ability. It's a specific way of being wired." Saravan was very still. She was, as he was speaking, processing somewhere between 6 and 9 things simultaneously, and one of them was the strange and airless feeling of being accurately described by someone who had known her for under an hour. In human terms, Aldrich said, this has a shape. It has a name. There are a lot of us who work exactly this way. It doesn't mean broken. It took us a long time to understand that, and we failed a great many people before we did, but we know it now. Then what does it mean? She asked. It means you tracked the hunt beast using a route none of the judges had seen. It means you calculated a thermal gap that was real and accurate. It means you noticed an attendant about to be hurt before anyone else registered his presence. Those aren't failures. Those are the same thing showing up in a context that doesn't have a place for it yet. Saravan looked at the covered pots along the courtyard wall. She looked at the low arch. She looked at her own small claws on the cold stone. Why did you notice all of that? She asked. No one else did. Aldrich thought about it honestly before answering, which she appreciated. Because humans spend a long time building tests that measured only one kind of thinking, he said. We left a lot of people behind that way. We're still fixing the damage. Once you've seen that mistake up close, you start to recognize its shape. She asked him what she should do. He told her that was not his decision to make, but he could tell her what a human in her position might do. She told him to tell her. Aldrich's report took him 2 hours to write and was exactly 4 pages long. He chose every word with the same care. He would use defusing something that could go wrong in several directions at once. He described what he had observed across the 5 trials in plain, documented language. He framed his meeting with Saravan as standard cultural outreach. He included his analysis under the heading of xenoanthropological observation and made no direct recommendations. He submitted it to Ambassador Sorrel before noon. She called him in before the end of the day. Sorrel was in her 50s, tall for a human, with a face built for the kind of patience that costs something to maintain. She had been the human ambassador to the Dracari sovereignty for 11 years. She had kept the relationship functional through 3 changes of sovereign and 1 near-catastrophic trade dispute. She was very good at her job, and she knew exactly what his report was doing underneath its careful language. You asked a royal hatchling of House Orin why she was thinking what she was thinking before a set of ritual trials, Sorrel said, reading from the first page. I asked her to describe her experience, Aldrich said. It's within the scope of cultural documentation. It is, Sorrel said. Technically. She set the report on the table and looked at him directly. If it becomes known that a human liaison officer coached the princess of House Orin on how to approach her royal trials, the diplomatic fallout would be significant. The Dracari do not like external interference in their succession structure. That's not a small thing. I didn't coach her, Aldrich said. I asked her one question. She answered it herself. What you told her afterward, about human frameworks and the shape of her thinking. Is cultural information shared during an informal meeting, the same way we shared dietary customs or naming traditions? Sorrel looked at him for a long moment. Aldrich met it without flinching and without adding anything, because he had worked with her long enough to know that adding things made it worse. Step back from this, she said finally. No further informal meetings. No additional reports on this particular subject. Let the process run its course. Understood, Aldrich said. He meant it. He was a professional, and he accepted direction. He did not argue. But Sorrel, who could read people the way other people read signage, caught something in the set of his jaw that told her the conversation would eventually matter in ways she had not fully mapped yet. She let it go. What she did not know was that Aldrich had already said the thing that needed saying. He had told Saravan, in that small courtyard among the ceremonial storage, that a mind which worked differently did not have to perform identically to others to succeed. Only equivalently. He had told her, you already know what you can do. The question is whether you can show them in a language they will recognize. He had also told her that in human practice, the answer often involved removing the interference first. Not the test. Not yourself. The thing getting between your ability and its output. Saravan had listened to every word. The following evening, she asked to see her father. Sovereign Vareth met with his children on a formal schedule, 4 times per season, in the audience chamber. Requests outside that schedule required a written justification. Saravan submitted hers in 3 sentences. The response came back in 2 hours, approved. Private meeting. East study. Before the evening meal. The East study was smaller than the audience chamber by a large measure, and older. The furniture was heavy and dark, and some of it had belonged to Varith's own father. Saravin stood in the middle of it and waited, and when Varith came in and sat across from her, she did not wait for him to open. She told him what she had been thinking before each trial. All of it, in order, in precise and calm language, the same way she had told Aldrich. The attendant's feat, the third sovereign's name, the thermal calculation, the beast and its young. Nira's expression at name 600. She did not apologize for any of it. She did not describe it as excuse. She described it the way you describe a measurement. Here is the data, accurately reported. Varith listened. His large, scarred hands rested flat on the arms of his chair. He did not interrupt. He was silent for some time after she finished. Then he asked, "Why did you not tell me this before?" "Because no one asked," she said. He had no answer for that. He was not a cruel dragon or a thoughtless one. He was a creature built entirely inside a structure so old that its walls had become invisible to him. It had never occurred to him to ask what a hatchling was thinking before a trial because in his experience, hatchlings were not thinking. They were performing. The thinking came later, after the instinct had fired and the result had been achieved. The idea that the thinking was what was interfering with the result was a shape he had no existing word for. He sat with that in silence, and Saravin led him. 2 mornings later, Captain Durin of the Royal Guard received a formal request from the princess to be permitted a second attempt at the 5 royal trials in modified sequence. He read it twice, confirmed it fell within the existing provisions of the trial charter, which allowed 1 re-attempt per hatchling before the naming ceremony, and began making arrangements without asking anyone for an opinion about it. Word moved through the court quickly, as word did. Most of the nobles assumed the outcome would be the same. A few of them were less certain than they had been. Counselor Nira heard the news in the corridor outside the archive room, paused for exactly 3 seconds, and then continued walking. She did not, that evening, open the ledger of trials. But she thought about it. The grand hall was full again. It felt the same as before in most ways. The flame pillars stood in their positions, indifferent and tall. The judges sat at their long table. The nobles filled the observation rows with their careful faces and their careful clothes and their careful expectations. The difference, this time, was that Saravin had made 1 formal request before the retrials began. She had submitted it in writing, through Captain Durin, and the judges had reviewed it for half a day before approving it on the grounds that it violated no existing rule in the trial charter. The request was this: before each trial, she would be permitted to briefly state what she was aware of in the room. Most of the nobles found this strange. A few found it amusing. One senior advisor told his neighbor it was a desperate measure. His neighbor said nothing and watched the hatchling walk to the center of the hall. Saravin stood at the center and looked at the flame pillars. Then she looked at the left column of junior attendants. She said, clearly and without apology, "The 2 attendants at the base of the left pillar, I am going to ask you to step back 3 paces before I begin." The attendants looked at the head judge. Judge Oren looked at Saravin for a moment. Then he made a small gesture with one hand. The attendants stepped back. Saravin turned to face the far end of the hall. She breathed in slowly. She felt the sound behind her ribs. The attendants were back. The gap between them and the pillar was sufficient. She was not watching them anymore. She let the thing she had been sitting on for weeks come up through her chest and out. The roar was not the largest the hall had ever heard. It was not the most dramatic, but it was a real roar, genuine and controlled, and the 2 flame pillars bowed. The enchantment responded without hesitation. The hall was quiet for a different reason this time. For the second trial, a fresh stone tablet had been placed on the iron stand. Saravin walked to it, looked at it, and turned it over so the carved-back face faced down. She met Judge Oren's eyes and said, "I will not burn his name. I will light the surface." She meant the third sovereign's name. She was not asking for permission exactly. She was informing, which was slightly different. Oren was still for a moment. One of the other judges made a small sound that might have been disapproval and might have been surprise. Then Oren said, in a flat and official voice, "Proceed." Saravin breathed onto the surface of the tablet. Not in a burst, not in a rush, but steadily and with intention. The fire that came out was not large. It was pale at the edges and gold at the center, and it had the same faint mineral smell as the smoke had always had. But it was real fire now, because she was not dividing herself between the fire and the stone's meaning. She had resolved the meaning before she began. The surface of the tablet turned gold, slowly and completely. The third trial, the wing ascent. Saravan stood at the base of the tower and looked up. She angled 15 degrees off the direct vertical line, toward the eastern wall. The judges shifted in their seats. 15 degrees off-center was not the standard route. She flew. The thermal current she had calculated was exactly where she had expected it to be. She rode it smoothly through the upper third of the tower, where the gap was, where the pain had come from on the first attempt. She came out above the peak of the tower and circled once, easily, before descending. She landed and stepped back from the tower floor with time remaining on the clock. No one in the observation row said anything. One of the junior judges was writing something in the margin of her copy of the record. She wrote for longer than notes usually required. The fourth trial, the hunt right. Saravan entered the reserve and followed the eastern ridge path as she had before. She found the beast in under 4 minutes this time, because she knew the terrain and she had spent 2 evenings memorizing the movement patterns of the reserve's animals from the palace library records. She stood before it. She looked at it. She did not look away. "It does not have young with it today," she said to the judges observing from the boundary. She was not asking for approval. She was resolving the question out loud so it could not take hold of her from the inside. She struck, clean and precise and without hesitation. When she walked back to the boundary, 2 of the judges were looking at each other with expressions they had not arranged carefully enough. The fifth trial. Saravan stood before the panel. She looked at Counselor Nira, who sat at the end of the judges' row exactly as she had before. "I will not be watching your face during this recitation," Saravan said. "I mean no disrespect." Nira blinked. A small, controlled blink. Then she gave a single nod. Saravan turned to the opposite wall, the blank stone wall with nothing on it. No faces and no expressions and no small movements to catch and pull at. She closed her eyes. She found the river of names, and she let it run. 1,012 names. Every sovereign of House Orin from the founding to the present, in order, uninterrupted, in 2 minutes and 23 seconds. When she finished, she opened her eyes and turned back around. The hall was quiet for the 3rd time that day. Then the low, resonant hum began. It started somewhere in the back of the observation rows and moved forward. Drackery did not applaud, but approval had a sound in their register, a deep collective tone that came from the chest, and it moved through the grand hall slowly and unmistakably. In the human diplomatic gallery above the main floor, Aldrich sat with his writing tablet on his knee. He had written nothing for the past hour. He had only watched. When the hum began, he put the tablet on the seat beside him and looked at the small pale gold dragon standing in the center of the hall below. He let out a quiet breath. After the court had dispersed and the judges had filed from the hall, Counselor Nira crossed the floor to where Saravan was standing. She stopped 2 paces away and looked at the hatchling for a moment with an expression that was doing several things at once. "Who taught you to announce your awareness before acting?" she asked. "The human liaison," Saravan said. "He asked me what I was thinking before the trials. I realized, when he asked, that no one had ever wanted to know." Nira looked at her. She closed the ledger of trials. She held it against her side and stood there, not walking away, not saying anything else. Just standing, looking at the flame pillars, which were still bowed at a slight angle, the enchantment not yet fully reset. The stone remembered the sound for a little while. That was how the enchantment worked. She had never thought to ask about the thinking before. Courts are efficient machines for moving on. Within 2 days of the retrials, the Grand Hall of House Orin had hosted a trade review, 2 formal hearings on border taxation, and a ceremony for a retiring senior guard. The business of the sovereignty did not pause for a hatchling who had passed her trials on the 2nd attempt. It noted the result and continued. But underneath the surface, certain things had shifted. Small cracks had appeared in structures that had seemed perfectly solid. Cracks do not always announce themselves. They sit quietly and do their slow work. The night after the retrials, Sovereign Vareth sent word that he wished to speak with Saravan privately. This was his 2nd unscheduled meeting with her in a week, which was unprecedented in her experience. She came to the east study again and found him already seated, which meant he had been there for a while. He did not start with ceremony. He said, "Your mother, when she was tested before her naming ceremony, went silent before the roar of sovereignty. Saravan looked at him. She passed on the second attempt, he said. I remember being in the observation row. I was younger. We were not yet bonded. I remember thinking it was nerves. He looked at his hands. No one asked her about it afterward. She did not speak about it. It was recorded as past and filed. He said nothing else on the subject. He did not draw conclusions out loud or offer any particular meaning. He simply gave her the information and left it with her, the way you leave something on a table and walk away to let the other person pick it up or not. Saravan picked it up. She held it carefully inside herself and did not speak for a moment. I did not know that about her, she said. There is much recorded about her in the official ledgers, Vareth said. Most of it is formal. Some of it is accurate. He paused. The informal record is shorter. I should have been better at keeping it. This was the closest thing to an apology that Saravan had ever heard from her father. She recognized it for what it was without making him say it differently. She stayed for another hour. They talked about small things. When she left, something between them had changed. Not repaired. It had not been broken in any simple way that could be simply fixed, but adjusted, reset to a different angle, where slightly more light came through. In her office at the far end of the administrative corridor, Counselor Neera sat alone at her desk with the ledger of trials open in front of her. Not the current ledger. The archive. The old one, with the cracked spine and the pages that had gone soft at the corners. It held the records of every hatchling who had been designated and proven in the last 80 years. It was a longer list than most people realized. The unproven were not spoken of. They were marked, filed, and either eventually passed or quietly redirected out of the formal succession structure and into other roles. Many of them had gone on to become notable figures in other areas. One was a master architect whose work stood in 6 cities. One had written the most widely used navigational framework in the sovereignty's eastern quadrant. One had become the most respected teacher the palace school had ever employed. None of them had been asked what they were thinking before their trials. Neera found a clean page in a separate book and began to write. Small notes. A question next to each name. What did they observe that the judges did not record? What were they aware of that interfered? Not accusations. Not revisionism. Just questions. The ones that should have been asked and hadn't been. In the human diplomatic quarters, Aldrich was summoned to Ambassador Sorrel's office 2 mornings after the retrials. He went with the calm expression of someone who had accepted all possible versions of the outcome. Sorrel looked at him for a moment when he came in. Then she told him that the Dracari Cultural Ministry had submitted an informal inquiry to the Human Diplomatic Office. They were asking whether human educational frameworks, specifically those related to assessment of cognitive diversity, might be made available for an exchange study. It was informal, preliminary. Nothing was agreed. Nothing was even proposed yet. It was the kind of small, quiet opening that might lead somewhere or might come to nothing. But it existed. Someone in the Dracari sovereignty, in an official ministry, had written a formal inquiry about a human idea. Sorrel was not smiling when she told him this. She was doing an excellent impression of someone who was not smiling. Is there anything formal I need to do? Aldrich asked. Not yet, she said. Then, after a pause. Good question, by the way. Which one? The one you asked the princess. Aldrich said he appreciated that. He meant it plainly, and she received it the same way, and then they moved on to other business because there was always other business. That morning, before sunrise, Saravan had gone to the palace roof alone. The city spread out below her in the gray pre-dawn light, all towers and bridges, and the long dark line of the river running through it. She spread her wings. The small ones. The ones that had taken her only halfway up the ascent tower on the first attempt, because she had been compensating for a thermal gap she had calculated and not known how to use yet. She did not roar. She did not breathe fire. She did not perform anything for anyone. She stood there with her wings open and thought about approximately 9 things simultaneously, the way she always had, the way she suspected she always would. She thought about the third sovereign's name on the back of a stone tablet. She thought about an attendant with nervous feet. She thought about thermal gaps and ridge paths in the beast that had not had its young with it on the second day. She thought about her mother going silent before a flame pillar and no one ever asking why. She thought about a human sitting in a gallery with no recording device and a question no one else had thought to ask. She decided that thinking about 9 things at once was not going to stop. She had spent her whole short life believing this was the reason she could not do what was required of her. She was beginning to understand that it was also the reason she had tracked a beast no one else could follow, calculated a flight path no one else had mapped, and noticed an attendant about to be hurt before anyone else in the room had registered his presence. It was not a flaw with a flaw's clean edges. It was a shape, a specific, complicated, occasionally inconvenient shape that was hers completely. Below, in a small office in the human diplomatic quarters, Aldrich sat down at his desk and opened a new document. He wrote a title at the top, On the Value of Asking What Someone Is Already Doing. He sat with the blank page beneath it for a while. He was thinking about how to begin. A human in his position might start with a statement, a claim, something confident and declarative. But he had learned, a long time ago, that the best thinking usually started differently. He put a question mark at the end of the title instead. Then he began to write.